this poor old icf2001D has been in my, well, it wasn't in my collection. This was the original radio I had before I started collecting any radios or anything like that. I purchased this from a friend of mine who was left in a will to him by his uncle, and his uncle was obviously into sort of like interested in shortwave radios and things like that. And he was left this radio, and basically all he did with this radio, he left it on his bedside cabinet, and used to wake him up in the morning. And I was, like, fascinated by this radio. I sort of looked over it and thought, I knew nothing about shortwave radios really then, and I looked over it and thought, oh well, it's got all these buttons and things. That's impressive. And then I saw it had this upper sideband, lower sideband, and continuous wave, and all this sort of, and synchronous detection. And I knew nothing about this. And I said, "Can I borrow the manual for it to just have a look through it?" And he said, "Yeah. I don't use a manual. I need it. You listen to Mercury FM. It was at the time." So I took the manual away and was reading about all these sort of like transmissions you could put up on these fangled single sideband receivers, and I thought, this is fascinating. I thought I'd love a radio like that. So well before internet, I went on the local WH Smiths and bought the local what was it? No, it wasn't the local. It was the radio. I can't remember which one it was. There was lots of them, Electronics Engineer and things like that, and all the ones that did the shortwave stuff. And had a flick through the magazines and thought, bloody hell, £300 this radio was when it was new. And then bear in mind, back in the 80s when you were only earning sort of £3 an hour, that was a hell of a lot of money. So I thought, well, maybe I could offer him some money for it, and sort of like or give him a radio replacement, which is exactly what I did actually. So I went back to him and said, look, I really like that radio. I'd have a lot of use out of it. I wouldn't just use it as a bedside cabinet radio. Are you interested in selling it to me? And he's a very close friend, and he still is now actually. And he said, well, yeah, I haven't got an alarm clock though. I said, well, look, you can have my Sony bedside cabinet radio. I said, what do you want for that? He said, well, I know they're quite expensive. He said, do you know how much they are? I said, well, yeah, I think the going price at the moment is about £300. So anyway, he said, well, I'll let you know. And he came back to me. He said, well, you can have it for £100. And it was like, in those days, it was in mint condition. This thing was perfect condition. So I managed to scrape together £100, which I think took me a couple of weeks, but I got together £100 and bought it. And to be honest with you, never looked back. As I say, this radio was absolutely pristine when I bought it. And this radio has woken me up for the last probably 25 years. It's only in the last 5 years I haven't been using it to wake me up anymore, because the battery connections become a bit unreliable and things like that. So for those who don't know, this is probably one of the best shortwave radios, portable shortwave radios there is out there. A lot of people will argue with that. Now, this radio had undergone lots of tinkering by me. The back had been off, and I was piddling about the synchronous detector and things like that. Well before I knew really what I was doing, I managed to get a service manual from a shop in Crowborough. I can't think what the name of the shop was, and they were great actually. They were quite interested, and I was keen to sort of fix these radios or try and fix them. I had no test equipment. All I had was like a very crappy voltmeter, multimeter, and they supplied me with the service manual. And one of the common problems with these radios is that, I don't know if you know this, but if you leave them on an external aerial, AM aerial, they've got a JFET front end, a 2SK152 from memory, and basically the input of the gate to the transistor is basically connected to the aerial. So if you get any static discharge or EMP or anything like that, you just blow the FET up. And I remember coming to try tuning on a long wave on 198 meters, or 198 kilohertz, and I had no signal strength. I'm thinking, that's weird, 198 should be really strong. So I tuned through like you do, and there was nothing. And just at the transition where it goes into sort of shortwave band, the signal strength came up. So looking at the circuit diagram, I sort of could just about work out that it looked like the RF front end had failed. One of the transistors had failed. So I went into this shop and said, could I could I order some transistors for it? And this is where back in the days, 25. This was 30 years ago, when this thing was basically a new model, and I said I need some transistors. He said, "Oh, what's the matter with it?" I said, "Well, I've had it connected to an external area, and I can't get any signal anymore." And he hadn't even heard of this fault. This was an early fault. This was, these were still only been out for a couple of years. I don't think it was, and of course nothing was advertised on the internet. And I said, well, it's got no medium long wave reception. It looks like the transistor on the by the aerials failed. I didn't really know what I was talking about. So he ordered me these two SK152s, and I've actually got them in a little package somewhere. And I had to order, I think, a minimum of 2 or 3. And I ordered these transistors. They were a couple of quid, and he was, as I say, they're really decent. If I remember the name of the radio shop, I'll put it in there. But it was in Crowborough. Someone might know what it is. So I replaced the transistor, and sure enough, the medium wave came back, and I was over the moon, and I was really pleased with that, and sort of got my reception strength back. And I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll make sure I disconnect the aerial lead every time I finished with it, because I had an aerial lead plugged into the side of it. And from then, I had a few other little problems with sort of switchboards and things. And then one of the worst case incidences were when I took the motherboard off these, and they're a bit fiddly to take off. And when I lifted it off, I actually broke a transformer. So I don't know, it must have been a boost converter or something like that. It wasn't an IF transformer, it was like a converter can transform or something like that, and the thing was totally dead. And I went back into the shop and said, "Look, I've broken this transformer, could you order me one of those?" And sure enough, they did that. They ordered me this transformer, and I managed to solder it back in with my very remedial soldering skills in those days, and get it back in, and it seemed to work. And then it developed another fault where sometimes you press the buttons, it wouldn't work at all. And that's when I opened it up again, I realised what it was the flexies inside had because it had been apart so many times, they'd actually fractured. And I'm thinking, well, it was a major job to resolder the new flexi, and so I just resoldered a load of wire links into it. And that's actually still got the wire links into it today. It's still got the same links in I put in 25, 30 years ago. Some of you might have noticed this control here. Now this control might look awful, but this is one of the best modifications I've ever done to a radio, actually. These have got a very coarse tuning step. Let me just show you. Let me just tune to a see if I can pick something up. So 5505 upper sideband. Okay, we're not getting anything there. So let me just try and find a signal. Let's turn that off. That's better. Okay, so we got a normal, there's a continuous wave signal. Let's go to continuous wave. Come on. Okay, so there's a Morse code signal there. Okay, now you've got steps of 100 Hertz, which is fine for sort of something like continuous wave, but if you want fine tuning, you haven't got any adjustment at all. So I've actually managed to fit this variable. This is actually a variable capacity. You could have done it because I didn't understand phase lock loop and all that sort of thing, and VCOs and things. But here we go. Look. So this gave me a fine control over the local oscillator and allowed me to actually tune in stuff really accurately. And another thing that was really useful is I don't know if anyone knows, London Volmate Main is broadcast on 135.375. 375. Okay, but it's actually not on 135.375, it's on 135.381. And it's slightly offset because it interferes with another transmitter. And if you adjust this, you might not be able to get it now because I've got too much background noise. You have to take my word for that. That gave me a fine adjustment over the local oscillator and allowed me to adjust to actually resolve this signal really quite well. And even now it's probably quite useful because even though this is limited to 136 megahertz, if you find a channel that's on the 7.33 spacing, is it 7.33? It will allow you to resolve it with the fine-tune control. And there's obviously nothing being transmitted at the moment because we're in lockdown and there's no aircraft transmitting. So this has probably been one of the most used radios, well, definitely the most used radios I've ever owned. It's been a real good workhorse. It hasn't been used for quite a while, but when I first turned it on, the volume control was right way up here, so the caps are obviously dying. You can see how much wear it's got because the wear marks on where I've rubbed my fingers up and down it so many times, and this all around here, it's just the whole thing's worn out. Around the power switch, you see how worn it is here. It's just worn out, this poor radio, but it keeps on going, and that's why I love the stuff about Sony. It's a lovely, well-built radio. I mean, 30-year-old radio, and it's still working. No, it's probably more than that, actually. Probably 35 years old now, this radio. And still working really strong. It's single sideband performance is still, actually, I think, very respectable. Let's see if we can find anything on single sideband. Come on, there might be something here. So we can call up bands on the by pressing the shift. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find anything. Let's try. I think it's 20. Let's have a search through so you can find something. All the switches are all a bit sort of like flaky now. And one of the best things about these radios, I'm going to turn to a bit of a waffle video, I'm afraid. One of the best things about these radios is the synchronous detector. Try and get a crappy signal and I can show you how the synchronous detector works. I don't know what that clicking noise is. There's something in here clicking away. It's obviously some sort of standby power supply that's keeping everything topped up. Let's try 3413 5505 8957. These are all Shannon Volmet. Well, they used to be 13264. No, I'm not getting anything. 472. It used to be Volmet Main 4722, but it's not anymore. And not Volmet Main, Shannon Volmet. No, Royal Air Force Volmet. It's not going to pick anything up in here, I don't think. Let's try this as synchronous detection. We've got two, it's perfect signal here. Two channels very close to each other. Now, if you look at the frequency, you watch how the selectivity of the radio jumps to the other channel. There you go. Okay. So what first thing we could do is narrow the IF bandwidth. But the other thing you can do is use synchronous detection. And we'll turn the synchronous detection on now. Okay. Now you can select the upper or lower sideband. But because the two channels are close together, okay, let's go turn the synchronous detector off. Come on. Okay, it's not a great demonstration, but what it does is if you've got two very strong signals close together, you can actually, not only can you narrow the bandwidth, but you can actually select which sideband you're listening to. And that's shown by this little thing here that shows you which sideband you're selecting to. Now, a lot of radios had that. The ICF, not the ICF, the low icf2001 has synchronous detection, but it's nowhere near as elaborate as this. This is far superior because it actually allows you to select which sideband you want to have. Turn the synchronous off. So we go fine tune.
Exactly right. Boss, I'll get it next time. Yeah, sure.
So you see when it's selecting the upper sideband, that's lower sideband, upper sideband.
Hey, bring me the receipt.
This way, please.
And why should I kill? Luto. I used to wonder about you. But I went to the youth gardens.
Let's actually see if I can induce my own interference on here, because I'm not. This demonstration isn't very good.
Had nothing to do here. I'm bored.
Okay, so when it flips over to upper sideband,
Hell yes, they would.
and that's about there, that should be
Just trust one designer.
center frequency, about
If you make them money, they'll do whatever you want.
7415. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this Roden Schwartz on and
some serious ties, do you?
generate another signal that's strong next
Get it.
at
I'm not leading this project. They'll ask me for
7410.
some ideas is all.
Don't be stupid. The company will get people to help if you need it. The thing is,
Okay, 7410, modulate it. So it's quite a strong signal, 7410, so that's our signal generator, and you see there, signal strength is pretty high up. Let's turn it right up. So we've got full signal strength. Now we want to resolve that channel next to us, which is weaker. So if you turn on, first we'll go narrow, and we'll go synchronous detection. There we go.
I'd say it's quite an honor that these gentlemen from the Urban Planning Bureau are able to join us here today.
So let's push our luck a bit. Let's move the frequency to 7412. It's struggling a bit now.
hey, don't say that. We're just doing our job.
Gentlemen, allow me to introduce...
Okay, and this is the demonstration I wanted to really show you.
We've all been very impressed by this man's vision. He's currently working on a new development...
So we're listening to 7415, and the Roden Schwartz is generating a very powerful signal at 7412, and you see the way it's managing to reject that. If you turn the synchronous detection off, you can't hear a thing. Go to narrow, you still can't hear a thing, but with synchronous detection, because you're actually selecting you've got the carrier and the upper sideband, you can select, once it's locked, press the right button. There you go. So that's quite a good demonstration, I think, of the synchronous detection circuit. And that's what I'm saying about these radios. They're great. They're a lovely radio. I've actually, believe it or not, I've got 3 of these. This one is basically going to be the one that's sacrificial when it finally goes tits up, which is probably not long from now. So it's a lovely radio. I hope that was of some interest. It was a bit of a ramble, I know. It's just to fill in a sort of like a bit of space, maybe entertain you if you're in lockdown. It's 20 less minutes to endure looking out the window, waiting for the lockdown to lift, and we can all go outside again. Anyway, thanks for watching, and more to come.